30 seconds.
Salam, hello. My name is Nusayba Alazam, and I am the second vice chair of the London Muslim Mosque. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Arawandran, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Lenape peoples, the land of our friends and allies. Our Indigenous brothers and sisters have seen horrible violence perpetrated on their lands, and we stand in solidarity with their struggle. It was at this very location that tens of thousands of community members gathered in collective anguish, grief, and alarm after violent Islamophobia took the lives of 4 members of the Afsad family. It was also here that we, at the London Muslim Mosque, formally called on our elected officials to convene a national action summit on Islamophobia to dismantle violent and systemic forms of hate in this country. We as a community are encouraged and heartened to see that this call has been heeded. As we stand here a few days before the summit is to take place, we want to use this opportunity to remind our elected officials that this summit is not, should not, and cannot be the end. It is simply a means from which we expect tangible change to take place at all levels of government. There's no excuse for inaction. Community members who are experts in this area have painstakingly crafted, which you will hear, over 60 tangible, concrete recommendations that would go a long way towards eradicating hate. All the recommendations ought to be implemented, but in particular, as a visibly Muslim woman and a lawyer who, if I wanted to move to Quebec and work for the office of the Crown, would be forced to choose between either practicing my faith or my profession, I feel particularly strong about Bill 21, a law that in the year 2021 polices and regulates women's attire, religious freedom, and our freedom of expression. While there are constitutional nuances concerning Bill 21, the Attorney General absolutely should be involved in all challenges of this discriminatory law, which disproportionately targets religious minorities, including our Jewish and Sikh brothers and sisters. There is so much concrete work that needs to be done on this and on so many issues that directly contribute to the fabric of Islamophobia and bigotry in this nation. So again, we optimistically approach Thursday's summit with the expectation that change will swiftly follow. After all, real change is the true and the only measure of success and accountability of this summit, so that we can all collectively ensure that no other community will ever have to open its doors to tens of thousands of mourners like we did here in London on June 8th. Thank you.
My name is Mustafa Farouk, and I am the CEO of the National Council of Canadian Muslims. I am here because a little over a month ago, a family lost 3 generations in a single night. The Afzal family and their names live in our memory. Salman Afzal, Madiha Salman, Yumna Afzal, Dalat Afzal. But there are other names. The name Muhammad Aslam Zavis, who was killed, martyred at the IMO Mosque in Etobicoke. There are the names of those killed at the Quebec City Mosque. Ibrahima Berry, Mamadou Tanu Berry, Khalid Belkacemi, Abu Bakr Thabti, Abdul Karim Hassan, Azzuddin Sufyan. The reality is that Canada has suffered more mass killings motivated by Islamophobia in the last 5 years than any other country in the G7. This cannot be allowed to continue. A bit over a month ago, here at the London Muslim Mosque, there was a call for change. Today, as we head towards the National Action Summit on Islamophobia, we are putting forward palpable policy action items for change. Because the reality is that since London, we have continued to see daily acts of physical violence, too long to name, in terms of attacks on Canadian Muslim communities from coast to coast. Let us be clear. Every level of government needs to commit to change so that this can end. Our 61 recommendations speak to that commitment clearly. This body of recommendations was compiled after talking to hundreds and in fact thousands of Canadian Muslims in consultations from coast to coast with a diversity of Canadian Muslims along the lines of gender, race, and class. Our recommendations are clear. At the level of the federal government, we need to see a commitment to enshrine the fight against Islamophobia within government. Right now, there are essentially no specific resources or strategy specifically around addressing Islamophobia, even as the federal government commits to the need to combating Islamophobia. Through the creation of the Office of a Special Envoy on Islamophobia, through investment under a specific anti-Islamophobia strategy into public messaging and supporting storytelling initiatives, amongst numerous other changes, we suggest in our recommendations that the federal government can and has to commit to the fight against Islamophobia. Simultaneously, the federal government needs to commit to fighting Islamophobia at the systemic level within government. Through looking at profiling at the CRA of Muslim-led charities, or how national security agencies have continued to profile Canadian Muslims and other racialized minorities while ignoring the threat and missing the threat in many ways of white supremacist groups, we call on the federal government today towards taking action on dismantling systemic Islamophobia within our institutions. At the provincial level, we have a range of recommendations, from looking at every province, including this one, committing to an anti-Islamophobia strategy in education, to provincial hate crime accountability units, to looking at the ways to stop violent white supremacist rallies in our provinces. At the municipal level, we believe that the key path forward is recognizing and celebrating the path forward, and we have brought forward a number of recommendations around that. We need to see action, and we need to see it now. Governments attending the summit must know that we want more than their attendance. We want to see their commitment to timelines. And as we see daily attacks against our community members since London, much more needs to be done. And it needs to be done now. At the end of the day, this is about choices. Do we choose to merely speak, to merely have words of consolation and consternation, or do we choose to act? Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Nawaz Tahir. I'm a London lawyer and the chair of Hikmah Public Affairs Council, an advocacy group for London Muslims. The night of the vigil, with all levels of government in attendance, I asked our elected officials to set aside partisan politics in this war on hate. I asked them to provide united leadership in this war on hate. Because sadly, as we are continuing to see Islamophobia continues to be a problem in Canada. And in the war on Islamophobia, unfortunately, sadly, and tragically, the Muslim body count continues to rise. The fact that we have 61 recommendations as part of this report and in advance of the National Summit tells us that we have a lot of work to do. But it's important work because as a nation, we are at a historical and important crossroads. If we want a country that truly values equity, diversity, inclusivity, and belonging, then we need to act immediately. We have work to do. We have work to do in dismantling systemic Islamophobia in government agencies, and in government architecture. We have work to do with our education system at all ages and across the country in valuing the contribution of people of all faiths and all backgrounds to humanity. We have work to do in a justice system, to create a justice system that protects, not suspects, Muslims. And we have work to do in building capacity, in the capacity to help Muslims dealing with mental health issues as a result of Islamophobia, particularly our women and our youth who seem to bear the brunt of this. We have work to do in building capacity amongst Muslims to participate in government agencies, to participate in the nonprofit sector, and to participate in the boardrooms of corporate Canada. The good news is that these 61 recommendations are achievable. They are achievable if our elected officials do what we have been asking them to do, which is to provide united leadership and set aside partisan politics. They're achievable if we have the will to action. They're achievable if we avoid the temptation to simply rely on words and tweets. And so we look forward to the action and actions of all levels of government at the National Summit. We look forward to that action so that no Muslim is taken from us again, is stolen from us again because of hate. Thank you.
We can take some questions as well now. Sure. So as noted in our documents, which you can see on our website at www.nccm.ca, one of the key pieces is that we're going to be issuing a statement at the conclusion of the summit as to what was committed to, but we're also going to be releasing a document 60 days after the summit, so that things that we're committed to, what were timelines associated to that, and that will be something that we're hoping to have every level of government indicate the timelines to achieving things. And if folks don't indicate that, I think it tells us something about what is the level of commitment vis-a-vis pure intentionality or in terms of actually getting things done.
My question is, has this been forgotten? Are you still confident to try to remove the wall for Islamophobia?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch the question.
Okay, sorry. Okay. Has this been forgotten? And are you still confident this strategy will move the ball forward on Islamophobia?
So, I mean, I don't think we can forget about it, because the reality is that there has been instances of violent Islamophobia happening since London. We've had stabbings. We've had people have knives pulled on them. We've had people beaten. Since, and this has sort of been on a daily basis, we've had mosques vandalized. Every single day, there's a new instance of something terrible happening. How can we forget about it? And clearly, by the way, politicians have not forgotten about it because we've seen them tweeting out messages of solidarity every single day. We need to go beyond that. We need to see action. I don't know. Sorry,
if I could speak to that question as well, just from a London perspective, I think the answer to that lies in the fact that at the vigil, we saw thousands of Londoners come out. In the walk, the interfaith walk, the Friday night following this, we saw tens of thousands of Londoners come out. And the night of the vigil, I asked Londoners and the attendees of that vigil to be ambassadors of love. And I think it is those same people who will not allow our elected officials to forget about this and who will be a part of that call to action and accountability of our elected officials.
Thank you. When do you hope that these guidelines will be in place?
Sorry, do you mind repeating the question, or it's a little hard to hear?
When do you hope the guidelines that you're presenting will actually take place?
So we hope that they will be, some of them, of course, may take time to implement, but we hope that the commitment to implement those happens right away. And some of them do not take, a significantly long time to do. For example, announcing the creation of specific resources around combating Islamophobia at the level of the federal government through the creation of an office of the Special Envoy on Islamophobia could happen tomorrow. In terms of Nuseba's comments about Bill 21, the Attorney General could commit to getting involved in the Bill 21 fight tomorrow. And the reality is that those are things that can happen now.
And what can people do to help get this passed quicker?
I think every single Canadian needs to pick up the phone and call their local representative and say, what are you doing to stop this? The reality is that attacks on racialized minorities, whether it's attacks on Muslims, Indigenous folks, Sikh folks, Black folks, Jewish folks, it implicates every single one of us as Canadians. That's why so many of the recommendations put forward in our document reference that. So for example, in calling for a national victims of hate support fund, that's something that helps everybody. As our Asian brothers and sisters are responding to the challenges of increased anti-Asian sentiment. What's being put forward is practical, is considered, and is something that every government needs to move on. And every single Canadian has an obligation to stand up and say, it's not just that we stand with our London family in solidarity in merely an intentionality sense, but we stand with them to actually get things done.
There's probably a federal election coming up. Are there plans to push parties as that process, goes on, and will you be endorsing a particular party if they're, seem more committed, I guess, to some of their recommendations than others?
So, I can't speak for, of course, all Canadian Muslims. I, of course, have a diversity of political perspectives. We are a nonpartisan group, and we never endorse any political party. What I will say is that every single political federal party passed a unanimous consent motion calling for the National Action Summit on Islamophobia. As Brother Nawaz so articulately observed, fighting Islamophobia, fighting forms of hate, fighting violence on our streets is not a partisan issue. Every single political party has a role to stand and work together so that we can see palpable, real change. And I expect that in every single platform, from every single party, whether it's the Federal Liberal Party, whether it's the Federal NDP, Conservative, Bloc Québécois, or the Greens, I expect all of them to put forward recommendations that acknowledge the recommendations made in our document.
I don't know if I do catch your name, so maybe you can answer. As we sort of near a federal election, how worried are you about the rhetoric that sort of is a bit dog whistly and goes, real Canadians or let's bring back Canadian values or all that kind of rhetoric that clearly has a
No, it does clearly have the direct impact on the fabric of Islamophobia for sure in this nation. As was mentioned by both Mustafa and Nawaz, we did call on all of our elected officials to put aside their partisan politics, to take a united stand, and for the first time in Canadian history, that is what we saw on the issue of Islamophobia. So we are optimistic that we've hopefully turned the corner from dog whistling, from this kind of divisive politics, and at least that's the hope that we saw at the vigil, and that's kind of what we want to make sure that we hold our politicians to account, right? To ensure that that is the case and that we have moved on, because frankly, our country cannot afford that kind of politics anymore on a number of levels, and obviously the most important being the price of human life.
I think just to answer that question as well, I think it's important to understand that we're in a minority government right now. And so any party can step up and talk about these initiatives. Any party can step up, and if they want Parliament to come back, can say we want Parliament back to deal with these issues. So I think it's important for all Canadians to understand and be a part of that piece as well, that words are no longer enough, that we're at this important crossroads, and that the future trajectory of our country and all of those principles that we hold near and dear to our heart are in play right now. Thank you.
This marks the conclusion of this press conference. Thank you all very much for coming. Thank you.
Sorry, one question. What is the summit being held?
Thursday. No, it's virtual.